New Year's Eve is supposed to be a celebration, a time to reflect, to hope, to be with the ones you love. That's what I told myself as I straightened my tie and glanced at my wife, Jessica. She looked stunning in her emerald green dress, her dark hair cascading down her shoulders, and her smile, well, it had been missing for months. But tonight I thought, tonight might change things. Jessica had always been the life of the party. She had a way of commanding attention, her laugh contagious, her wit sharp. But recently something had shifted. She was colder, more distant. I told myself it was the stress of her demanding job, the pressure we both felt trying to navigate our lives together. We arrived at my best friend Aaron's house. The place buzzed with energy. Glasses clinking, music playing, laughter filling the air. I greeted familiar faces, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, but Jessica had already disappeared into the crowd. It didn't bother me at first. She loved to mingle, and I didn't want to cling to her like an anchor. But as the night went on, I noticed something unsettling. She wasn't just mingling. She was avoiding me. I caught glimpses of her across the room, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too wide. She was talking to a group of people I didn't recognize. Leaning in close, her hand brushing against a man's arm. My chest tightened. When I finally approached her, she turned to me with an expression that froze me in place. It wasn't annoyance or anger. It was disdain. "Oh, there you are," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you'd finally decided to socialize for once." Her words hit me harder than I expected. But before I could respond, she turned back to the group, effortlessly continuing the conversation as if I didn't exist. The evening stretched on, and the weight in my chest grew heavier. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As the night carried on, Jessica's behavior became more erratic, more pointed. Every word she spoke seemed calculated to cut me down in front of others. At first, it was subtle jokes about how I never really understood parties, or how I was such a workaholic. People laughed, but I felt the sting. Then she turned the volume up. "Can you believe he didn't even know how to open a bottle of champagne when we first met?" she announced to a group of strangers. Her voice carried over the room, and suddenly, everyone was looking at me. I had to teach him everything. How to dress, how to talk, even how to act like a real man. The laughter was polite, but I could feel the embarrassment radiating from my face. "Jessica, maybe that's enough?" I said quietly, trying to smile through the tension. "Oh, come on, Mike. Don't be so sensitive," she shot back, rolling her eyes. "We're just having fun, aren't we?" I wanted to leave. I wanted to grab her hand, walk out the door, and put this nightmare of a party behind us. But I knew how that would look. I knew she would twist it into something it wasn't. "Can't handle a little teasing?" she would say. "Grow up." I stayed. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, her every step a performance. And then I saw him, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a confident smirk that seemed to mirror Jessica's energy. His name was Adam. I overheard someone mention it as he introduced himself to her. Within minutes, they were standing closer than seemed appropriate. Her laugh was louder now, her touch more frequent. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. A part of me wanted to walk over, to say something, but I felt paralyzed. What could I even say? "Stop flirting with him?" She'd laugh in my face. The low hum of voices around me blurred into static as I watched them. I tried to distract myself, picking up a drink and talking to Aaron about work, but my eyes kept darting back to her, to them. And then, the moment that shattered everything. Jessica turned toward me, raised her glass, and called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mike, honey, don't look so worried. You don't want people to think you're some kind of cuckold, do you?" The room fell silent for a second, and then there was laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make my stomach drop. I felt my face flush as a wave of humiliation crashed over me. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air. But all I could do was stand there, frozen, with a forced smile plastered on my face. Jessica didn't seem to care, or maybe she enjoyed it. Either way, she turned back to Adam, who looked far too pleased with himself, and continued their conversation. I couldn't take it anymore. I left the room, finding refuge in an empty hallway. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of a small table, trying to compose myself. How did it get to this point? How did the woman I once adored turn into the stranger who seemed intent on destroying me? But I couldn't leave, not yet. I had to stay for appearances, for the sake of my dignity, what little was left of it. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the room, the party swirling around me as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I returned to the crowded room, but it felt smaller now, suffocating. The music thumped in my chest, conversations blurred together into a droning hum, and I could barely meet anyone's eyes. I felt exposed, like the punchline of some cruel, ongoing joke. Jessica, meanwhile, was radiant, basking in the attention she commanded. She stood near Adam, her emerald dress shimmering under the dim light, her laugh piercing through the noise. I tried to focus on anything else, the drinks table, the appetizers, the clock slowly ticking toward midnight, but my gaze kept drifting back to her. She caught my eye at one point, and I hoped for a flicker of acknowledgement, some sign of remorse. Instead, she smirked, as if daring me to confront her. And then, as if the night hadn't already sunk low enough, she made her move. "Everyone," she called out, raising her glass. "A toast." The room quieted as heads turned toward her. My stomach churned. I could feel something terrible coming. "To the men in this room," she began, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. "The strong, confident men who know how to take charge." Her eyes slid to Adam, then back to the crowd, completely bypassing me. "And to the rest of you, well, let's hope the new year teaches you a thing or two." Laughter erupted, and my cheeks burned with shame. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back up. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay rooted in place. Reacting would only feed into her game. Aaron approached me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mike, man, are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "She's just had a bit too much to drink." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he nodded and stepped away, respecting my unspoken plea to drop it. Jessica, meanwhile, had moved on from her toast and was now engrossed in conversation with Adam again. Their body language was unmistakable. Leaning close, his hand brushing against her arm, her laughter spilling out like a performance meant just for him. It was then that she turned to me, as if remembering my existence, and said loud enough for others nearby to hear, "Mike, honey, I'm not feeling well. Adam offered to take me home. You don't mind, do you?" The room seemed to spin. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask what she meant, but no words came out. "Of course," she continued, not waiting for my response. "You'll be fine here. I'll call you when I'm home." Adam smirked, his confidence almost daring me to challenge him. I glanced around the room, feeling the weight of judgment in every pair of eyes. My mind raced. What could I do? Start a scene? Demand she stay? "No problem," I finally muttered, my voice hollow. Jessica smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't meant for me, and grabbed her coat. She linked arms with Adam as they walked out the door, leaving me standing there, the laughter and chatter of the party pressing down on me like a crushing wave. For the rest of the night, I stayed on autopilot. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear, nodded at conversations I didn't follow. The minutes dragged on until I could finally slip out unnoticed. Driving home, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I told myself she would be there when I arrived, waiting with some explanation that would make it all okay. But deep down, I knew the truth. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the house was silent. Empty. Jessica wasn't there. The silence was unbearable. The kind that wraps around you like a cold fog, suffocating and heavy. I stood in the dimly lit entryway of our house, staring into the void, hoping, praying, that Jessica would step out from the shadows with some plausible excuse. But the air was still, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I dropped my keys on the table and walked into the living room, the hollow echo of my footsteps mocking me. Her coat wasn't on the rack. Her shoes weren't by the door. Everything was exactly as we'd left it earlier that evening, except now, I was alone. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. My mind raced through every possible explanation, each one more absurd than the last. Maybe Adam had dropped her off at a friend's place. Maybe she was upset and needed space. Maybe I had misread everything tonight. But I couldn't shake the image of her walking out arm in arm with him, her laugh still ringing in my ears. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. I tried again, and again, until the sound of her automated message felt like nails scraping against my brain. "Jessica, call me when you get this," I said after the beep. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I just want to know you're okay." The hours dragged on. Midnight came and went, and the sound of distant fireworks outside only deepened the emptiness inside me. I stared at the clock, willing it to move faster, as if time passing could somehow make the situation less surreal. By 2 a.m., I couldn't sit still any longer. I paced the room, glancing at my phone every few seconds, waiting for a call or a text that never came. The house felt like a tomb, cold, lifeless, and filled with the ghosts of better times. My thoughts turned darker. What if she wasn't coming back? What if this wasn't just another one of her games, but something final? I walked upstairs to our bedroom. Her vanity was exactly as she'd left it. Perfume bottles neatly arranged, her favorite lipstick lying uncapped, a strand of her hair caught in the bristles of her brush. I stared at these small, intimate details, feeling a surge of anger and heartbreak. How could someone so familiar, so intertwined with my life, be capable of causing so much pain? I sat on the edge of the bed, my head pounding. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the night over and over again, dissecting every word, every look, every gesture. Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. My heart leaped as I grabbed it, but the name on the screen wasn't Jessica's. It was Aaron. "Hey man," he said when I answered, his voice groggy. "I just wanted to check on you. You left the party pretty suddenly." "I'm fine," I lied, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "Thanks for checking in." "You sure?" "Jessica." She was acting. He trailed off as if unsure how much to say. "Yeah, I know," I said, cutting him off. "I don't want to talk about it right now." Aaron hesitated, then said, "All right, but if you need anything, you know where to find me." I hung up and tossed the phone onto the bed. The brief conversation only made the ache in my chest worse. The sky outside began to lighten, the faint glow of dawn creeping in through the curtains. Still, there was no sign of Jessica. No call, no text, nothing. I sat in the stillness, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a bad evening or a misunderstanding. This was something far more insidious. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Jessica was doing, wherever she was, it was deliberate. The sun rose slowly, painting the walls of the bedroom in soft, golden light. I hadn't slept a single minute. My mind was a storm, torn between anger, sadness, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. The weight of Jessica's absence was heavier in the daylight, every quiet second amplifying the questions pounding in my head. Where was she? Why hadn't she called? I checked my phone again. Still nothing. It was past 7 a.m. now. I debated calling her, but the thought of hearing her voicemail one more time made my stomach twist. Instead, I wandered downstairs, hoping the mundane act of making coffee might distract me. The kitchen was eerily silent. The faint smell of last night's party snacks clung to my clothes, a bitter reminder of the humiliation I'd endured. I filled the coffee pot with water, each drip echoing loudly in the stillness. As the coffee brewed, I sat at the table, staring blankly at the steam rising from the machine. My mind kept replaying the look on Jessica's face when she left with Adam, carefree, amused, as if my feelings didn't even register. I thought back to when we first met, how she'd seemed so different back then. Confident, yes, but also kind, supportive. She had this way of making me feel like I was the center of her world. But over time, things shifted. Her words grew sharper, her affection more conditional. At first, I dismissed it as stress or bad days. But now I wondered if I'd been blind to something much deeper. The coffee pot clicked off, snapping me out of my thoughts. I poured a cup and took a sip, the bitterness matching the pit in my stomach. By 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. My heart jumped, but it wasn't Jessica. It was a text from Aaron. "Hey, just checking in again. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Haven't heard from her yet. I'll keep you posted." He responded almost immediately. "Let me know if you need anything. Seriously." I set my phone down and glanced out the window. The neighborhood was waking up, joggers passing by, cars starting, kids on bikes. Life was moving on, but I felt stuck, frozen in the aftermath of last night. And then, finally, my phone buzzed again. This time it was her. "Stayed at a friend's place. Don't wait up for me." That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just a flat, impersonal message. My chest tightened as I read it over and over again, searching for something, anything, that might hint at remorse. But there was nothing. It was like she didn't care how her actions had affected me, like I was just an afterthought. I wanted to respond, to demand answers, but I stopped myself. What was the point? If she could do what she'd done last night without a second thought, would she even care about my words? Instead, I set the phone down and stared at the text, my mind swirling with a mix of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a growing sense of clarity. This wasn't just about last night. This was a pattern, a cycle I'd been trapped in for far too long. And as much as it hurt to admit, I knew I had to face the truth about what my marriage had become. But first, I needed answers. Jessica's text left a sour taste in my mouth, but it also solidified my resolve. I couldn't let this slide, not this time. I needed to understand where she'd been, what she was thinking, and why she thought it was okay to treat me like I didn't matter. I grabbed my keys and jacket, my mind racing. If she wouldn't give me the answers, I'd find them myself. The streets were quiet as I drove, the morning light casting long shadows over the houses and empty sidewalks. I didn't have a clear plan, just a gnawing determination that propelled me forward. My first thought was to check with her closest friend, Emily. They'd been inseparable at one point, though recently, Jessica had seemed to distance herself even from her. When I arrived at Emily's place, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. What was I even going to say? "Hi. Has my wife mentioned that she might be cheating on me?" The thought made me cringe, but I pushed it aside as the door opened. Emily stood there in sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair in a messy bun. She looked surprised to see me but offered a polite smile. "Mike? What's up? Everything okay?" "Sorry to bother you," I began, trying to keep my tone light. "Have you heard from Jessica?" She mentioned staying at a friend's place, but she didn't say where. Emily's brow furrowed. "No, I haven't talked to her in weeks. Is everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, no big deal. Just thought maybe she'd stopped by here." Her concern deepened, but she didn't press further. "If I hear from her, I'll let you know." "Thanks," I said, turning to leave. Back in the car, frustration bubbled beneath the surface. Emily's reaction confirmed what I'd feared. Jessica hadn't stayed with her. So where had she gone? I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind replaying the events of the night before. The way she'd laughed with Adam, the way she'd looked at him like I wasn't even there, the humiliation of her words in front of everyone. And then it hit me, Adam. He'd been at the party. He was the one she'd left with. If anyone knew where Jessica was, it would be him. I didn't know much about him, but I remembered hearing someone mention that he worked at a nearby real estate office. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I found the office easily enough. A sleek, modern building with glass doors and a sign that read Paramount Realty. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the sterile smell of air freshener and polished floors hitting me immediately. The receptionist looked up from her desk, smiling politely. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Adam," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is he in today? Her smile faltered slightly. Adam doesn't work weekends. Can I take a message? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, that's all right. Thanks. I walked out, my frustration mounting. Dead ends everywhere I turned, and Jessica still hadn't bothered to explain herself. Back in the car, I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't keep running in circles. If Jessica wouldn't give me answers, I'd have to make her. I drove home, each passing mile sharpening my focus. I'd let things slide for too long, let her treat me like I was invisible. Not anymore. When I walked through the front door, I was greeted by the same suffocating silence as before. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and sent her a message. We need to talk. I'm not letting this go. Call me. And then I waited, the minutes crawling by, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just about last night anymore. This was about every unspoken insult, every cold glance, every moment she'd chipped away at who I was. One way or another, I was going to get the truth. The day passed slowly, each hour dragging on like a punishment. Jessica didn't call, didn't text, didn't acknowledge my message in any way. By evening, my patience was fraying, my mind darting between anger and despair. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in shadows, I heard the familiar sound of keys jingling at the door. My chest tightened. She was home. Jessica walked in casually, as if nothing had happened. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup still intact, and she carried herself with an air of indifference that made my blood boil. "Hey," she said, barely glancing at me as she set her purse on the counter. "That's it?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Hey." She paused, her hand hovering over the purse. "What do you want me to say, Mike? Maybe an explanation? Or an apology? You left with Adam last night and didn't come home. Do you even realize how that looks?" Jessica rolled her eyes, her lips curling into a smirk. "You're overreacting. I told you I stayed at a friend's place." "Which friend?" I demanded, standing from the couch. "Because I talked to Emily, and it wasn't her." Her smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by something colder. "Why are you asking around like some jealous teenager? It's pathetic." The word hit me like a slap, but I refused to back down. "You humiliated me in front of everyone last night, Jessica. You called me a cuckold in front of our friends. Then you leave with another man and don't even have the decency to tell me where you are? You don't think I have a right to ask questions?" She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "You're being dramatic. Adam offered me a ride because I wasn't feeling well. That's all." "And then what?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Where did you go? Why didn't you come home?" Jessica's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But instead, she shrugged. "I don't owe you a play-by-play of my night, Mike. Maybe if you weren't so insecure, you wouldn't feel the need to interrogate me." Her words cut deep, but they also ignited something inside me, something raw and unyielding. "This isn't about insecurity. This is about respect, Jessica. About trust. And right now, I don't feel like I can trust you." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're unbelievable. You're the one making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need to find excitement elsewhere." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a weight. I stared at her, struggling to process what she just said. "Excitement elsewhere?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "So, that's what this is about? You're bored with me?" Jessica didn't answer, but her silence was louder than any response. I felt a lump rising in my throat, a mix of anger and heartbreak threatening to consume me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What did I do to deserve this?" She looked at me with something akin to pity, her expression softening for a brief moment. "You didn't do anything, Mike. That's the problem. You just exist. And I need more than that." The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I stood there, rooted in place, as she turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence once again. For the first time, I truly questioned everything. Not just last night, not just our marriage, but myself. Who was I if the person who was supposed to love me couldn't even see my worth? I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. Jessica's footsteps upstairs faded into the distance, but her words echoed in my mind, over and over. Something had to change. I couldn't live like this anymore. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. Jessica's words echoed in my head long after she disappeared upstairs. You just exist, and I need more than that. I'd never felt more insignificant in my life. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the grain of the wood. My coffee cup from the morning was still there, cold and untouched. The weight of the day, and the years leading up to it, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. Jessica and I had built a life together, or at least I thought we had. But now, I couldn't ignore the cracks that had been forming for years. The dismissive remarks, the subtle put-downs, the way she always seemed to be somewhere else, even when we were in the same room. I reached for my phone and opened the gallery. There were dozens of photos of us from happier times. Vacations, holidays, lazy weekends at home. In every picture, Jessica was smiling, radiant, the center of attention. And there I was, always in the background, always supporting her, always trying to make her happy. When had things changed? I scrolled further back to the early days of our relationship. Back then, everything felt so simple, so easy. She'd laugh at my jokes, hold my hand like she never wanted to let go, tell me how much she appreciated me. Now, it felt like I was just a convenience, placeholder. I set the phone down, my chest tightening. The Jessica I'd fallen in love with wasn't the same person standing upstairs. Or maybe she was, and I'd been blind to the truth all along. The thought made me feel sick. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, but I knew sleep wouldn't come. I needed air, space, something to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the crisp night air biting at my skin. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lit by the soft glow of street lamps. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts circling like vultures. Was this salvageable? Could we go back to the way things were? Or was I fooling myself? I thought about the man Jessica had been with at the party, Adam. His smug grin, the way she leaned into him, like I wasn't even there. Was that what she wanted? Someone new? Someone exciting? The possibility made my blood boil, but it also left me hollow. If she didn't want me anymore, why couldn't she just say it? Why drag me through this charade, humiliating me in the process? As I rounded the corner back to our house, I stopped in my tracks. Jessica's car was gone. My heart sank. She must have left while I was out, and she didn't even bother to tell me. I walked inside, the empty house greeting me once again. The silence was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where her car had been. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed with an apology or a promise to do better. This was the beginning of the end. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in the entryway, staring at the empty driveway. The house felt colder than it had before, like the air itself had been sucked out of it, leaving behind nothing but a suffocating void. Jessica was gone. It hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I could breathe. She had left me. There was no other way to interpret it. I walked through the darkened house, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The pictures we had hung together, the framed memories of our travels, our life, our love, all felt like they belonged to someone else now. Someone who wasn't me. I went into the living room where I had spent countless nights with her, watching TV, talking about our future, laughing about stupid things. But now all I could feel was emptiness. I grabbed my phone and stared at it for a long time. I could text her, call her, ask where she was, demand an explanation, but what was the point? Everything she'd done until now was a silent admission that she didn't care about me anymore. A part of me still wanted to believe that it was all a mistake, that she was just confused or caught up in something temporary. But deep down, I knew better. The door creaked open, and I turned sharply, heart racing. But it wasn't Jessica. It was the sound of the wind rattling the door, the night air making its way inside. My chest tightened with frustration. I sat on the couch, my mind racing through every argument, every glance, every moment that now felt like a prelude to this. Jessica had checked out long before she physically left. The signs had been there, but I'd been too caught up in the hope that things would get better, that we could somehow find our way back to where we started. But I couldn't fix something that had been broken for so long. I opened the photo gallery on my phone again and looked at the pictures of us, of a life I no longer recognized. I remembered her smile, her laugh, the way she'd hold my hand like she never wanted to let go. Those moments felt like they belonged to another person, someone I used to know, someone who wasn't standing before me now. The realization settled heavily in my chest. She didn't love me anymore. I didn't know when it had happened. Could have been weeks, months, maybe even years. But somewhere along the way, Jessica had stopped seeing me as her partner. I had become a background character in her life, someone she tolerated but no longer needed. And I had been too blind, too naive to see it. I felt a sharp pang of guilt. Maybe I had been too passive. Maybe I hadn't been the man she wanted me to be. I had tried, God, I had tried. But nothing had worked. Suddenly, I felt so alone. I stared at the front door, the final symbol of Jessica's departure. She wasn't just gone physically. She had taken everything with her. The love, the trust, the partnership we once had, all of it was now nothing more than a memory. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my identity, my sense of self. Who was I without her? I realized then that this wasn't just about her leaving. It was about me finding a way to leave the past behind, to stop clinging to a version of her that no longer existed. I wasn't ready for that, but it was inevitable. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like lead. The house felt impossibly empty, each room haunted by the echoes of the life we once had. But I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep waiting for her to come back. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. Something inside me snapped, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I was going to move on, no matter how painful it was. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, my heart heavy, but my mind clear for the first time in days. The night air felt different, colder somehow. But it didn't matter. I was leaving the past behind. I had to. The night was still, the streets eerily quiet as I drove through the city. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, but I didn't feel like I was really going anywhere. I wasn't sure where I was headed, just that I needed to get out of the house. Away from the place that had once felt like home. Away from the painful memories that were choking me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I instinctively pulled it out, expecting another text from Jessica. But it wasn't her. It was Erin. Dude, where are you? You've been on my mind all day. If you need to talk, I'm here. I stared at the message for a long moment. Erin had been a good friend to me, especially in the last few months when everything with Jessica had started falling apart. He'd been the one to listen when I vented about the small things that started adding up, the growing distance, the coldness in her voice, the late nights when she'd be on her phone more than talking to me. I took a deep breath and typed back. I'm out, man. I don't know what's going on anymore. I just need to figure some stuff out. Whatever you need, just let me know. But don't keep running from this. You need to face it. I read his words again, slowly, as they sank in. You need to face it. I hadn't been facing anything. Not really. I had been avoiding the truth, the hard, brutal truth. I had been so caught up in my own confusion and pain that I had ignored the obvious signs of what had been happening in our relationship for months. Maybe longer. I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine purring softly as I turned off the car. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. The quiet was deafening. Jessica had been right about one thing. Something had been missing between us for a long time. The spark had died, and we both knew it. The difference was, she had already moved on, and I was still pretending that we could fix it. But now, I wasn't sure it was even worth fixing. A part of me still wanted to believe that we could find our way back. That somehow, things could go back to the way they were before all of this, before the arguments, before the silence, before the growing resentment between us. But as I sat in the car, staring out at the dark road ahead, I realized that I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already gone. I needed to stop running. I needed to stop pretending. I pulled my phone back out and typed a message to Jessica. The words were harder to write than I expected. I don't know where we're headed anymore, but I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I can't keep chasing you when you've already checked out. I need to face the truth. I need to stop waiting for something that isn't coming. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it's time for me to let go. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I stared at the screen. She'd probably never respond. She had made it clear over the last few days that she didn't care about me anymore. But it didn't matter. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I needed to stop living in the shadow of our relationship. I needed to reclaim who I was. I couldn't keep shrinking myself to fit into a life that was falling apart. I drove back home, but this time the house felt different. The walls that once held so many memories no longer felt like they were mine. It was time to make new memories, to move forward, and to leave the past where it belonged, in the past. The road ahead was uncertain. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep holding on to a version of Jessica that no longer existed. I couldn't keep clinging to a life that was already slipping through my fingers. It was time to let go. I spent the next few days in a haze, the finality of my decision lingering like a shadow. It wasn't easy to let go of Jessica, not by a long shot. Even though I'd sent that text, telling her I was done, that I couldn't keep pretending, there was still a part of me that hoped she'd come back. I kept telling myself that it wasn't weakness. It was just the remnants of love, right? That's what I told myself every time I thought about her. Every time I remembered the way she used to hold my hand when we'd walk through the park. The way she would laugh at the dumbest things I said, like I was the funniest person in the world. But those were memories, and they were fading. I had to focus. This wasn't about holding on to the past, it was about the future. The future that I'd been neglecting for too long. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I was nothing more than an afterthought. I couldn't keep ignoring the things that mattered to me, the things that had once made me happy. I had lost myself in trying to please her, in keeping up with the expectations she had, even when I knew deep down that I was losing who I was in the process. The phone buzzed again, and for a moment, my heart skipped. Jessica? But it wasn't her. It was Erin again. You still up for grabbing a drink tonight? I know you've been going through it, man. But you don't have to do it alone. The message made me pause. Could I do it alone? Could I really go through this next chapter by myself? I thought back to all the nights I'd spent alone in this house, the walls closing in on me, the weight of Jessica's absence hanging over me. But maybe it wasn't about being alone anymore. Maybe it was about finding myself again, reconnecting with the person I used to be before all of this. So I texted back. Yeah, let's meet. I need to get out of here. I arrived at the bar an hour later, my nerves still on edge, but with a small spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was strange, almost foreign to feel that again, but Erin was right. I didn't have to go through this alone. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar, a drink in front of him. He raised a glass when he saw me, a small but genuine smile on his face. About time you showed up, he said, his voice light, but there was a knowing look in his eyes. I sat down beside him, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease. You were right, man. I needed to face it. Erin nodded. It's tough, but you're stronger than you think. You've got a lot more fight left in you. I looked at him, unsure if he really understood how deep this hurt went, but I appreciated his words. He wasn't offering me empty cliches. He was just there. We spent the next few hours talking about everything and nothing. The music, the other people in the bar, random jokes that didn't matter. But it felt good. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so trapped. I left the bar that night feeling lighter, like the weight on my chest had eased just a little. Maybe it wasn't all gone. Maybe it never would be. But the fact that I was able to step out of my own head, even for a moment, felt like a small victory. When I got home, it was still quiet, but it wasn't the same suffocating silence that had consumed me before. Now there was room for me to breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I was done waiting for Jessica to be the person I needed her to be. It was time for me to start being the person I needed to be. I had to rebuild. And this time I was going to do it for me. A week passed since that night at the bar. I felt more like myself again, slowly rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I had started going to the gym again, reconnected with old friends, and found time to breathe. But even with all this progress, there was still a nagging thought in the back of my mind. It was a Saturday evening when I got the call. Jessica's name flashed on my phone, and my heart sank. I hadn't heard from her in days. I didn't want to pick up, but I did. "Mike, we need to talk." Her voice came through, distant, almost desperate. "About what?" I asked, my tone guarded. She hesitated. "About us. About everything." I didn't know what she wanted, but I wasn't ready to go back to that place. "I'm not sure there's anything left to talk about." "You're right," she said, her voice shaking. "But I think you deserve an explanation." I didn't know if I could listen to it, but I couldn't just leave it unfinished. "Fine. I'll be there." I met Jessica at a small cafe downtown. Her face was drawn, the usual confidence replaced by something I hadn't seen in her before: regret. "Mike," she said softly as I sat down, avoiding eye contact, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I didn't speak, waiting for her to continue. Part of me didn't want to hear her excuses, but another part of me needed to understand what happened. "I don't know when it started," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I got lost. In myself. In us." I swallowed hard, the bitterness rising in my throat. "Is that your excuse? You got lost?" "No," she quickly corrected. "It's not an excuse. I messed up. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late." The words hit me like a cold wave. I hadn't heard her admit anything like that before. It made my chest tighten, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "I don't know how to fix this, Mike. I don't even know if I can," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. I stared at her for a long time, taking in the person sitting across from me. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. She wasn't even the person I knew anymore. "I think it's too late for that," I said, my voice steady but filled with finality. "I can't keep holding on to something that isn't real." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand." I stood up, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. "Take care of yourself, Jessica." And with that, I walked away for good. Walking away from Jessica was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it felt like a release. I had been chained to her for so long, desperately trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Now, as I stepped out of the cafe, the weight on my chest finally felt lighter. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, I focused on myself. I started taking better care of my physical and mental health, things I had neglected for years. I called my family more, rekindled friendships that had withered in the background, and even started picking up old hobbies I had forgotten about. One night, after a long run, I sat down on my couch, exhausted but at peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if Jessica would come back into my life. I knew now that she couldn't. I was no longer the man I was when we first met, and I wasn't going to wait around for someone who didn't value me the way I deserved. It was time to live for me. It's funny how life works. You think you know where you're going, and then suddenly, everything shifts. I had been stuck in a cycle of pain, trying to rebuild something that was already broken. But in that destruction, I had found freedom. A month after walking away from Jessica, I realized I was finally starting to feel whole again. Not perfect, but alive. Alive in a way that I hadn't been in years. The loneliness wasn't as suffocating anymore, and I had learned to enjoy my own company. One day, I got a message from Aaron. "How's everything going, man? I haven't heard from you in a while." I smiled and typed back, "I'm doing better. Really better. I think I finally let go." "Good. You deserve to be happy. No more looking back." As I read his message, I thought about everything I had gone through. The pain, the anger, the confusion. It all had its purpose. Without it, I never would have learned to be strong, to be the man I am now. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't healed. But I was moving forward. And that was enough. There's a part of me that will always look back on the person I was with Jessica, the man who gave everything he had to make her happy. But I can't stay that person anymore. I can't stay stuck in a past that no longer serves me. I had a new chapter ahead of me, and I was ready to write it. Sometimes the hardest moments in life lead to the most important lessons. When things fall apart, it's easy to think it's the end, but in reality, it's just the beginning of something new. If you're struggling right now, remember that you don't have to keep holding on to things that no longer serve you. It might be hard to let go, but in doing so, you make room for better things to come. If you're going through something similar, don't hesitate to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this story meaningful, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories of strength and healing. Thank you for watching.